Perfect. Here's chapter 1 of your story, written as a long, plain paragraph with a dramatic hook, tension, and setup for the twists to come. I'll make it gripping for USA and UK audiences. Chapter 1. The morning had started like any other for Aaliyah, a young black woman in her mid-20s, dressed neatly in her modest work attire, clutching a check she had worked months to earn, a check she needed to deposit at the prestigious downtown bank to pay for her mother's medical bills, unaware that her simple trip to the bank would become a turning point that would shake the lives of everyone involved. As she walked into the bank, the polished marble floors and high ceilings seemed intimidating yet inviting, and she approached the counter with a polite smile, handing over her check to the bank manager, a man in his 50s with a permanent scowl and a bias he thought he could hide behind his suit. But the moment he looked at Aaliyah, something inside him twisted, and without any explanation, he grabbed her check and tore it into pieces right in front of her. His eyes filled with disdain and disbelief, muttering under his breath about how people like her shouldn't be trusted with money, leaving Aaliyah stunned, humiliated, and shaking with a mix of anger and embarrassment as a small crowd of onlookers murmured, some shocked, some uncomfortable, while others pretended not to see, and she stammered, trying to plead with him, explaining that the check was from her mother, a reputable businesswoman, but he waved her off arrogantly, convinced she was just another inexperienced, incapable young woman, and as she left the bank, her heart pounding, tears threatening to fall, she felt a familiar fire of determination ignite inside her, because what the man didn't know was that her mother, the very person who had written that check, was none other than Selena Hawthorne, the self-made millionaire CEO of a global tech empire, a woman known for her sharp mind, uncompromising standards, and unmatched influence in the business world. And Aaliyah knew that confronting the injustice would not be easy, yet the thought of her mother discovering this blatant act of disrespect made her resolve firm, and she walked through the city streets, each step measured, each breath controlled, planning how she would report the incident, all the while imagining the shock on the bank manager's face when he realized he had humiliated not just a young woman, but the daughter of someone who could literally ruin his career with a single phone call. And as she reached her apartment, she sat down to compose a message to her mother, carefully detailing every humiliating word, every torn piece of paper, and the smug expression of the man who thought he could demean her without consequence. And Selena's response came swiftly, not with anger, but with a steely calmness that made Aaliyah's blood run hot with anticipation, because her mother's plan was meticulous, calculated, and designed to ensure that the bank manager would face consequences far beyond his imagination, setting the stage for a confrontation that would expose corruption, prejudice, and greed. And Aaliyah realized that this incident was no longer just about a torn check. It was about justice, accountability, and proving that underestimating someone based on their appearance or background could lead to a reckoning so powerful that it would leave everyone involved gasping. As little did the bank manager know, his arrogance had just set in motion a chain of events that would unravel his entire life, his reputation, and his career, and the city that once seemed intimidating now felt charged with possibility, because Aaliyah, armed with the knowledge of her mother's power, was no longer a victim but a harbinger of a truth that would come crashing down on those who thought they could oppress with impunity. Chapter 2. The next morning, Aaliyah woke up to a message from her mother that made her stomach twist with anticipation and fear, a single sentence that carried the weight of a storm about to break, instructing her to return to the bank at precisely 10 a.m., to wear her most professional attire, and to act as though nothing had happened, because Selena Hawthorne had a plan that would expose the bank manager's prejudice in a way he would never forget. And as Aaliyah entered the bank once again, the atmosphere felt different, charged with an invisible tension that made every polished marble surface, every sterile countertop, and every fluorescent light seem like a stage set for an inevitable reckoning. And the bank manager, unaware of the storm approaching, greeted her with a condescending smile, thinking he had already won, oblivious to the fact that the very person he had humiliated was now armed with the leverage of an empire, a legacy of wealth, power, and influence. And Aaliyah handed him a new check, larger this time, representing a fictitious but believable corporate transaction, and watched as he inspected it, his arrogance evident in the way he leaned back, smugly tapping his pen against the counter, when suddenly, a soft voice behind him cut through the hum of the bank, calling him out by name, and the manager froze, turning to see Selena Hawthorne herself walking through the doors, impeccably dressed, her presence magnetic, commanding every eye in the room. And as she approached, the manager's confident facade began to crack, beads of sweat forming on his forehead, his mind racing, realizing that the young woman he had humiliated was not just anyone, but the daughter of one of the most powerful CEOs in the country. And Selena, with a calm but icy tone, recounted the entire incident in detail, describing the torn check, the disrespect, and his presumptuous assumptions. And as she spoke, the other bank employees, previously silent witnesses, watched with wide eyes, some whispering, some nodding in shock, and the onlookers outside the glass windows craned their necks, sensing that a scandal was unfolding, and the manager, desperate to salvage his dignity, attempted to apologize, stammering through excuses about policies, procedures, and misunderstandings, but Selena interrupted, her voice sharp and precise, demanding accountability, threatening to report the incident to the corporate board, the press, and the regulators, revealing in one calculated moment that she had already alerted her legal team and that the check Aaliyah had brought was tied to a multi-million-dollar transaction, a transaction that the manager had just jeopardized with his prejudice and arrogance, and as he stuttered, trying to regain composure, Selena delivered the final blow. She offered him a chance to redeem himself, not through words, but through action, by publicly acknowledging his mistake, writing a formal apology, and implementing anti-discrimination training, and as she laid out the terms, Aaliyah felt a mixture of vindication, relief, and awe, realizing her mother's strategic brilliance, because what had started as a humiliating moment had transformed into a public lesson on power, bias, and justice, and the manager, now visibly shaking, agreed reluctantly, his career hanging by a thread, while the crowd that had gathered erupted into murmurs and whispers, some capturing the scene on their phones, knowing that this story would go viral, and as Selena turned to leave, she whispered to Aaliyah, a simple but loaded statement: never let anyone make you feel small. Never. And always remember your worth. And as mother and daughter walked out of the bank together, a sense of triumph and empowerment filled the air, but unbeknownst to them, a deeper twist was already brewing, because one of the employees, a junior teller who had watched everything unfold, quietly slipped away to make a call that would introduce a new player into this drama, someone connected to the bank's highest board members, someone whose actions could either complicate the mother-daughter victory or amplify it in ways no one could predict. And in that moment, Aaliyah realized that the journey from humiliation to vindication was only the beginning, that the real battle against prejudice, arrogance, and injustice was far from over, and that the lessons she and her mother had orchestrated today would ripple far beyond the polished marble floors of that downtown bank, into the city, into the media, and into the lives of anyone who had ever underestimated the power of knowledge, wealth, and righteous indignation. Chapter 3. The following day, the city seemed to hum with a strange electricity as news of the bank incident had already begun circulating online, and Aaliyah, still riding the surge of empowerment from her mother's intervention, felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension because the junior teller who had slipped away in the previous chapter had made a discreet but urgent call to one of the bank's most influential board members, a man named Jonathan Carlyle, known for his ruthless pursuit of reputation and profits, and within hours, an emergency meeting was convened, with the manager summoned to explain himself before the entire executive board, unaware that the young woman he had humiliated would not only attend but be accompanied by her mother, Selena Hawthorne, who had decided that the full force of her influence should be used to ensure that justice was served on a scale far beyond anything he could imagine. As the manager entered the sleek, glass-walled boardroom, he was immediately confronted by the steely gaze of Selena, whose presence alone commanded silence and respect, and the manager, attempting to regain composure, fumbled through excuses, insisting that it had been a misunderstanding, that he had only followed protocol, yet Selena's response was swift, sharp, and utterly devastating, as she produced emails, CCTV footage, and witness testimonies that meticulously documented not just the act of tearing the check, but the arrogant and discriminatory behavior that had preceded it, leaving the board members shocked and visibly uncomfortable, whispering amongst themselves as they realized that the incident was far more than a minor complaint. And then Selena dropped the final, unanticipated bombshell, revealing that the check was tied to a major merger her company had been negotiating, a merger worth hundreds of millions, and the manager's actions had risked millions in potential revenue, placing him directly in the crosshairs of legal liability and corporate embarrassment. And as the board gasped, the manager's bravado crumbled, realizing that every decision he had made in arrogance now threatened his career, his reputation, and potentially his freedom, while Aaliyah, standing beside her mother, felt a surge of pride and vindication, knowing that what had started as a moment of humiliation had transformed into a display of intelligence, strategy, and power that no one could ignore. Yet just as the manager began to plead, promising reforms and apologies, Selena revealed a final twist that no one saw coming. She had already orchestrated a charitable initiative through her company to fund programs that empowered young women of color in finance and business, using the incident as a teaching moment, and the manager, realizing that he had not only been exposed but had inadvertently become part of a historic story, could only nod miserably, accepting the consequences of his actions, while Aaliyah, beaming with satisfaction, understood that her mother's genius was not only in seeking justice but in transforming a personal affront into a catalyst for societal change. And as the board adjourned, the media swarmed, broadcasting the story across the country, turning Aaliyah and Selena into symbols of empowerment, resilience, and the unstoppable force of intellect backed by integrity and wealth. And in the quiet aftermath, as mother and daughter walked out into the bustling streets, Aaliyah whispered to her mother about the ripple effect they had created, and Selena smiled, knowing that the lesson was clear. Prejudice, arrogance, and underestimation would always have consequences, and no one, no matter how entitled or powerful in their small world, could outmatch knowledge, courage, and strategy when wielded with purpose. And as they disappeared into the crowd, the city itself seemed to hum with the possibility that the tide of injustice had just been turned, not with violence, not with revenge, but with intelligence, planning, and an unshakable refusal to be diminished, leaving the bank manager to confront a lifetime of lessons he would never forget, and ensuring that Aaliyah would never again doubt her worth or the extraordinary legacy of her mother.